Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Creepy Bus Driver by Sensitive Gazelle. The story happened to me in 2022 when I was around 24 years old. For a bit of context, I'm a non-binary assigned female at birth, but let's say I look very feminine. At the time, I was studying in Paris and renting a room in the house of the mom of my boyfriend at the time, in a city that was more than an hour away from Paris, but 20 minutes from Versailles. It was in winter, during a school break, I think, and I was going out in Paris to see a longtime internet friend for the first time. She turned out to be a very toxic and problematic person who I'm not in contact with anymore, but this story is not about her. I will say that I have a rather petite frame because of an eating disorder I was dealing with, and have been ever since I was a child. And I've always looked much younger than my age. Even these days I need to show my ID when I want to buy alcohol. On the day of my encounter with my friend, I was dressed casually with a skirt. Our encounter went very well, but since I lived far away and was planning to go to my boyfriend's house later, I had to leave before midnight because the public transportation would become scarce after 10 p.m., and I had another 2 hours of transit to get there. Unfortunately, I didn't leave early enough, so I managed to catch a train to Versailles, but then would have to wait almost an hour to get a bus to go to the nearest city from my boyfriend's house, where he would then pick me up with his car. While I was waiting near the train station, I noticed a group of bus drivers who were smoking and talking to each other. I approached them to ask which one of them was going to drive the bus to insert name of city closest to my boyfriend's house here, and one of them, a small man with gray hair who was probably in his late 40s or early 50s, said that it was him. He noticed my skirt and said that I must be freezing, so he asked me if I wanted to go heat myself up in the bus and wait there until the time of departure. I gladly accepted, as I was indeed freezing, and while he was walking me to the bus, which was parked in a very dark corner with no lights, he got very close to me and started to act very familiar with me, asking me about where I lived and where I was going to, and that sort of thing. I was feeling very uneasy and uncomfortable, but I was raised to be polite, and I've always been a people pleaser, so I answered all of his questions with as little details as possible until we reached the bus. He opened the door for me, and while all my instincts were screaming at me to not go in the bus, I ignored them anyway and got in. I sat at the front of the bus where there was a bit of light, but mind you, I'm black, and even in the dark it would have been very difficult for anyone to see me. Beside the other bus drivers who saw me leave with the driver, no one knew I was in that bus. Anyway, the second I got in, things got even weirder. He threw his lit cigarette away and got in the bus with me as well, all while telling me a bunch of anecdotes about the bus, about how the bus was actually designed to transport the French football team, and how there was a huge table and even a bathroom at the back, and that I should come in the back of the bus with him to see it. He suggested to me twice to come in the back of the bus where there was absolutely no light, and that scared me even more, so I texted my boyfriend, "Might not come tonight. Weird bus driver. Call me ASAP." I did that while ignoring the driver rambling. He then came back to the front of the bus and stayed in the corridor blocking my way. He talked about random things I don't remember, and all the time his eyes were fixated on me, especially on my phone that was in my hand, and he kept looking at my knees and thighs. All the time I was praying for my boyfriend to see my message and call me, and when he finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief. The driver must have seen the face of my boyfriend on the screen of my phone because he took a step back, and then he told me he was going to smoke another cigarette outside. I answered my phone and told my boyfriend everything that was going on while looking out the window to keep an eye on the bus driver. When he was far enough, I ran to get off the bus, only to discover in shock and horror that he had locked the door. I was trapped on the bus, and no one knew where I was except my boyfriend, the creepy bus driver, and the other bus drivers who saw me leave with him. Still on the phone with my boyfriend, I went back to where I was previously sitting and saw through the window that the creepy bus driver was coming back. When he saw me on the phone, he left and locked the bus again. He did this circuit back and forth a total of 3 times, locking the bus behind him every time. But the last time he stayed near it, so I hung up with my boyfriend and decided to text him instead. At one point, I sat on another seat to keep an eye on the creepy bus driver, and through the window, I saw and heard an elderly woman who asked him if his bus was going to the city nearest to my boyfriend's house, and he deliberately lied to her, telling her that that would be another bus. At that point, I was freaking out, frantically texting my boyfriend that I was going to die, that the bus driver was going to do terrible things to me, then kill me and throw my body away. It was at that moment that the bus driver went back into the bus and locked the door again. We were supposed to leave in less than 10 minutes, and suddenly something finally snapped in my brain. I got up, trying to maintain a calm appearance, and lied to him about how I needed to go back into the train station and go to the bathroom. He told me there was a bathroom in the bus, but then I lied again, saying that I needed some snacks from the vending machine. He hesitated and finally accepted to let me go, but before he did, he pretended twice that the button to open the doors wasn't working, and at that point I didn't care about hiding my distress anymore. I told him that if he didn't open the door, I'd pick the emergency hammer to break the door, and then suddenly the button was working again. I bolted off the bus and took the deepest breath of cold, fresh winter air I've ever taken. I've never been in prison, but I imagine what it feels like to be released from prison. I then ran to the train station, hid behind a vending machine, and when I finally felt safe, I burst into tears. I called my boyfriend back, and he told me that he'd called his sister who lived in Versailles so that her boyfriend could come and pick me up. While I was trying to calm myself, guess who I saw coming into the train station? The creepy bus driver. He was acting like he was looking for something, or rather someone, and that someone was likely me. I held my breath and waited for him to leave, and then cried some more because I realized at that moment I was his prey, and that I was right about his bad intentions. Finally, the boyfriend of my boyfriend's sister came, and he took me back to where I lived. But I couldn't sleep that night, or the following few days. My insomnia was terrible. I sent an email to the bus company, but since that guy wasn't the usual driver for them, nothing was done, and I never really received an answer from them. I'm very grateful for everyone who helped me that night, and I know it's been said before, but let me say it again as a reminder. Trust your guts, trust your instincts. They're never wrong. And also, fuck being polite with creeps that make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe or uneasy. Stay safe, everyone, and have a nice life. Butterflies and Dead Chickens by Chalky Burb. Me and my brother attempted camping back in the Mark Twain National Forest, totally primitive style and not at a campground, just in the woods alone with a tent. We also decided to take a heroic dose of shrooms for some reason, and at first it was really wonderful. There were butterflies everywhere. We decided to sit in the river for a while. Suddenly, we started to feel off. We felt like we were being watched. We kept catching a whiff of a tremendous rot stench on the wind that would come and go. We felt an urgency to get back to camp and start a fire, so that's what we did. Then we noticed there were a lot of butterflies, like a disturbing amount. It felt incredibly eerie. My brother was gathering logs nearby and discovered a dead duck. And then another. And then a few chickens. And then we realized it was an entire trail of dead ducks and chickens leading back into the woods, a darkened part with a thicket. We decided to lay down in the tent and try to overcome the eerie feelings, thinking maybe it was all a coincidence, and because we were under the influence. But at the same time, we both felt a frantic need to get the fuck out of there before dark. It was like your first time playing Minecraft with the sun going down, knowing that monsters would spawn. We just felt very strongly that we couldn't stay there at night, so we packed up everything so frantically that we accidentally broke our tent, and then we hurried home. Literally, the second we got out of that part of the forest, we felt a type of relief wash over us that we couldn't explain. It was like the eyes of a predator were no longer upon us. We went back the next day for our beach towels that we had left at the river, and we also wanted to see how different the vibe was while sober, and if all those dead ducks and chickens were still there. Well, they were there, and the vibe was the same. At the river in the exact spot where we were sitting, someone had made rock stacks, one for me and one for my brother. And whoever it was also stacked a line of rocks dividing the river from where we sat. It was absolutely bizarre, especially because we went back in the morning, so if somebody did do it, and not some creature of the woods, they obviously had a lot of time on their hands. And plus, why the fuck would they even do that? And why were they watching us? How did they know exactly where we were sitting in the river, and why didn't they touch our beach towels? Well, that was the dumbest thing we've ever done, but it is a fun memory now. Elizabeth and the House on Alberta, submitted by Cups. I'll preface this story by saying I'm a very open-minded person when it comes to the paranormal, and I do believe in ghosts and spirits. However, the logical side of me always tries to find an explanation before deeming something paranormal. Some things can't be explained, and here are some of them. It was Portland, Oregon, in 2008. My then husband and I had found an adorable house to lease on trendy Alberta Street. The rent was reasonable, and the woman who owned the house worked with my husband. She was easygoing and artsy, and her husband was a furniture designer. It seemed like the perfect fit. I instantly fell in love with the large dining room with built-in cabinets and a buffet. We learned that the house was nearly 100 years old, with all the original single-pane windows still in. And I love older homes, so this made me happy. Soon after we signed the lease in August of that year, I lost my job and found myself unemployed for the first time in years. After the initial panic, I thought, oh well, this will give me plenty of time to set up the house and move in. I even found a set of antique furniture that was period appropriate for the house, a beautiful hand-carved wood-trim Italian sofa and chair, the rich-looking curved kind, covered in pink damask. The couch was hands down my coolest piece of furniture, and we barely used it at the time for fear of messing it up. The antiques dealer told me the set had belonged to a very wealthy old woman who kept it in her sitting room, and oddly enough, it looked as though no one had ever used it for actual sitting. I got it at a huge discount, as they had the set in the display window for many years, and the only thing wrong with it was that the fabric was a little sun-faded. My husband at the time worked a cushy corporate job and was able to make his own hours. He preferred to go in early and start his day at 6:30, which meant he had to leave the house by 5:30 in the morning. It was between the time that he'd leave and the time that I'd get up, generally around 9 or 10. I'm just not an early riser. That's when things started to get weird. It began with what I believed to be sleep paralysis. The house would be completely quiet, but it just felt like something came over me. I can't explain it. This would happen several times a week for months between 6 and 9 a.m. Then I started to have terrifying dreams about walking around in the house and being terrorized by an unseen spirit. I'd try and try to wake myself up, but couldn't move or open my eyes. It was like I was being forced to sleep somehow, paralyzed with fear. Eventually, I'd wake up, shake off the strange experiences, and then carry on with my day. I often would go for a long walk mid-morning and then come home to browse jobs and do housework, not bothering to get myself presentable until later in the afternoon. One day, I had the television very low in the living room while I took a shower and started to get ready. The bathroom was through the kitchen and around the corner from the living room. I couldn't hear a peep from the TV. The house was mostly silent and I was alone. I was putting on makeup in front of the bathroom mirror when I heard a distinct female voice whisper, "What is that?" It was so clear that it frightened me, and I whipped around to see who was in the house. I walked through the house, checked all the doors, which were still locked, and then walked in the living room to see if the TV could have carried a sound like that through the house. It didn't, and I came up with nothing. Days later, a similar thing happened to me, but this time it was seen and not heard. I was again putting on makeup in the bathroom around the same time of day. I had the door wide open. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement right outside the door, and as I turned to look, I saw what I can only describe as a 1900s black dress, showing only the very bottom hem with ruffles. It was as if someone were walking by the door very quickly wearing a long, flowy dress, only I couldn't see anything above the ankles. That, of course, was very alarming to me, so I set off around the house to see if there was some explanation for it. But again, I came up with nothing. One night, I stayed up late and went to bed long after my husband. He was sound asleep, and just as I got comfortable, the bed started vibrating. I sat straight up, thinking maybe it was my husband, but he was as still as could be. So I laid back down, and I still felt it. I got up, thinking I was losing my mind. I got a glass of water and returned to bed, and I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, like an appliance running or a truck nearby that might have caused the vibration. Whatever had been vibrating the bed didn't seem to affect the floor or anything else in the house. The vibrating continued, and I tried waking my husband, but he didn't budge. He is a very heavy sleeper. I shut my eyes tight and tried to go to sleep when I felt the distinct pressure of someone sitting on the edge of the bed and then standing up. I was too afraid to look or move, and I eventually fell asleep that night, and that never happened again. By October of that year, we'd been hearing little noises here and there, but we shrugged them off as just old house stuff. The house was always freezing cold, and I mean always. Portland is generally very mild in the fall and winter, but we were running our heat around the clock just to keep it at 65 degrees. And again, I chalked it up to old house stuff, what with the single-pane windows, though our landlords had put a layer of plastic insulation on them by that time. My husband and two friends of ours were gearing up for Halloween, and one night we decided to watch a few classic horror movies at our house. Of course, this adds to the imagination. We were kind of spread out around the living room, all on separate seats. My friend Annalise sat on the pink sofa, and I sat next to her on a chaise in the corner, which sat just slightly behind the sofa. A few minutes into one movie, I noticed Annalise, who claims she's sensitive, stroking the arm of the sofa the way she would stroke a cat's back. I didn't think anything of it and averted my attention back to the film. Then I noticed Annalise reaching into her handbag, pull out a pen and notebook and write some things down. She went back to stroking the sofa and closed her eyes occasionally. I knew something was up, but wasn't sure just exactly what. This went on for maybe 20 minutes or more before she leaned over to me and said, "I need you to come to the kitchen with me." She looked alarmed, so I quickly went into the kitchen with her and asked if she was okay. She said that yes, she was fine, but there was a woman speaking to her on the sofa. Annalise said, "You're going to think I'm nuts, but sometimes I hear and feel things. This woman's name is Elizabeth, with a specific last name that I'm not going to share." Annalise went on, "She's attached to the couch. She contacted me to let you know that she's here. Have you had any experiences lately?" My eyes got huge. I said yes and proceeded to tell her everything that had happened. Annalise said the "what is that" whisper was likely a curiosity about my makeup, and that this woman Elizabeth probably felt intrigued by my process, and thus made herself known while I was getting ready. She didn't have any explanation for the bed incident, but we agreed that it was all somehow connected. The next day, out of lingering skepticism, I did a lot of digging on the internet. I found death records of an Elizabeth in Portland with the same last name Annalise had described. The woman had died in the 20s, and it could have been a coincidence, or perhaps Elizabeth Eyre was the wealthy woman the antiques dealer bought the set from. My husband and I stayed in the house for another year, but eventually an opportunity we couldn't refuse came up and we moved. We said goodbye to Elizabeth as if she would stay with the house and not the sofa. Nothing's happened since, so maybe she stayed there. The Mushroom Tunnels by Icy Negotiation. My girlfriend and I decided to visit what's known as the most haunted town in Australia. Since we only lived an hour away, we thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to check out the infamous Mushroom Tunnels, one of the biggest paranormal hotspots in the area. We arrived around 11 p.m. and had to sneak through a bend in the fence to get in. There were 3 trails ahead of us, and we had no idea which one led to the tunnels, so we just took the first one. Right away, I felt uneasy, way more than I expected. I had been wanting to visit this place for months, and now that I was finally there, I should have been excited. But instead there was this overwhelming eeriness, a kind I'd never felt before. Before going, I'd been reading my girlfriend some stories about the tunnels. People had reported seeing shadow figures, strange lights, and even satanic cults performing rituals there. So, as we walked that first trail, I was already on edge, feeling like something could jump out at any second. And yet, despite it being a 99% full moon, we still couldn't see a thing. Eventually, we reached the end of the trail, only to find nothing. Just endless open fields. Annoyed, we checked social media and realized we had taken the wrong path. Trail 2 was the one that actually led to the tunnels, and that meant walking all the way back down. When we reached the starting point again and faced the 3 trails once more, something about Trail 2 felt immediately wrong. I thought the first trail had been dark, but this was on another level. It was pure blackness, like the trail itself absorbed light. All we had for illumination was our phone flashlight, which barely helped at all. As we hesitantly walked forward, a large sign suddenly came into view. The Mushroom Tunnels. At that point, I turned to my girlfriend and straight up asked if she wanted to leave. The energy there was unbearable, and for the first time, I seriously considered turning back. But then I had a moment of clarity. I had been waiting for this night for months. I was finally here. I had to at least step inside. So I turned back toward the tunnel and walked a little closer. That's when my girlfriend said, "That's the tunnel right there." I followed her gaze, and I saw it, and I ran. I can't explain what I saw. It's like my eyes registered something, but my brain refused to process it. The only thing I knew in that moment was that I needed to get the hell out of there. My girlfriend caught up to me, her face pale. She swore she saw a figure standing in the middle of the tunnel staring directly at us. I'll never truly know if that's what I saw too, but whatever it was, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. But that wasn't even the scariest part. After sprinting back to the car, we jumped in, locked the doors, and turned on the ignition. I went to connect my phone to Bluetooth, and the most gut-wrenching, horrific sound blasted from the speakers. I can't even describe it properly. It was low, distorted, and deeply unsettling. My girlfriend immediately felt sick and begged me to turn it off, but I knew I had to capture it. I recorded as much as I could before finally shutting it down. And that's the end of our story. But something tells me that place isn't done with us yet. Uncle Josh note: the author of this story actually sent me the audio recording that he made of that night, so here it is, guys. Make of it what you will. Worst hinge date ever by Acceptable Injury. This happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. I'm a 32-year-old guy and a 9-year veteran of the Navy, currently using my GI Bill to go to college in Idaho. I'm so busy with school and work, I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I rely a lot on the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age, and we had a good conversation, and we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant not far for either of us to drive to, so it was perfect. She was very pretty in person, and we got along great. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned she had a roommate, whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much, and she said he was harmless, so I kind of let it go. We had a few more drinks and were there for about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said we should go back to her place. I mean, I wasn't going to argue. She was hot. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I'd been drinking, and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I had only had 2 gin and tonics and was fine. But again, she insisted. I thought it was weird, but I didn't care. We went to her house, and she walked up and opened the door. She didn't unlock it. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. Well, she started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either. I could see clearly that it was Frosted Flakes, and that the cereal hadn't been in there that long enough for the milk to take the frosting off, so I knew it wasn't old. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she had eaten it as a snack before heading to the bar. That didn't make sense, but before I could say anything, she just kissed me and put her arms around me seductively, and took me to her room. Again, she was pretty hot, and I quit caring about the cereal. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp, a scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window, and I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and whoever it was took off. I heard steps running across her back deck, and I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked. And of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was going to fuck the dude up, or at least try to, but she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane, and she told me, well, he does this and then just goes away. And I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" And she said, "Yeah, and not to worry about it." At that point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end. And she didn't seem scared at all and kept trying to get me to go back to bed with her. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I knew, this dude was a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was back at the bar. I was terrified. I had an adrenaline rush that was so intense that it gave me that metallic taste in my mouth, and my stomach hurt. I felt stuck and slim on options, but all I knew was I didn't trust her at all. At that point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal, and I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. She kept telling me to calm down again and again and just to go back to bed with her. The banging was pulsating. Her ex would bang on one part of the house, and then it would stop, and then it would start up at a different part of the house. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicking in, and I told her, "If this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I will kill you both." Look, I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. I ordered an Uber off my phone when she wasn't looking, and I didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking her what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so that I could leave right when I wanted to. Luckily, I never took my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up pretty quickly, thankfully. But the banging was on the front part of the house by the front window, not 10 feet from the door. But without saying anything, I just opened the door and ran out as fast as I could. I saw the person running around the house and just kept running to the car, and I got in and looked back at the door, and my date was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month, but I honestly have no idea what the fuck I was into. I didn't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based on the factors I've told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing. Or even worse, a trap to murder someone. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet, and I allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account in the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well, if they ever saw her in there again. Too Sleepy to Care by Novel Basis. Germany, 2014. After 2 years of stagnation, I decided to do something with my life, and despite my parents' opinion, I moved out. I also decided to continue my education, but in order to do so without help, I had to start 2 jobs. That's how I ended up in the basement with my roommate Ryan. Yeah, fake name. The whole house belonged to his parents and had 2 floors plus a basement. The second floor was occupied by an older couple, the first by a woman who I saw twice during my entire stay. The ground floor was empty. Honestly, living there was awful. Even without the older couple fighting, our ceiling was constantly leaking and the windows were in a place where people could access them from the street. They would often stare in at what we were doing, and we had drunk people peeing on our windows or kids trying to take things off the windowsills or get in. Summertime was a nightmare. But after 2 or 3 months, I was so tired that I stopped caring. You want to watch me undress in my own room? Fine. Another colony of spiders in our bathroom. Well, I guess my arachnophobia is cured. Time for a bath. Ryan taking my stuff without ever asking? Who cares? But 2 years later, and it was 2014. It was August and I was sleep deprived. But I finally had a week off, No studies, no work, no responsibilities. Just some good rest. So one day I laid in bed and slept all day. But around 4 p.m. I started hearing sounds. Lots of shuffling, slamming of doors, and quick footsteps. Before I was fully awake, the door to my room opened. Someone grabbed me and started shaking me, saying, "Get up!" Okay, I opened my eyes. My first and only thought? Ryan. This man looked nothing like him. Ryan had long black hair, was very thin, and always wore a green hoodie. This man was much taller, much more muscular, and bald. But yeah, my brain saw all those differences, but still I thought, Ryan. I remember saying, "What, can't you see I'm trying to rest?" And then I turned on my left side. Ryan didn't leave, though. He tugged at me again, still saying, "Get up." I said, "No way." And then, "Look, I don't care what you did this time. Just get out." Though it was probably a lot less coherent and understandable. Well, Ryan left, and I heard him moving around our house for a while and making more noise. And then I fell back asleep. 2 hours later, Ryan woke me up again. He was panicked and basically asking if I was okay, and I was like, "What now?" Our kitchen and Ryan's room were destroyed. We'd also lost our laptops, my phone, Ryan's games and manga, some food from the fridge, and for some reason my notebooks and a cheap small Bulbasaur figurine I kept on my night table. After this, police quickly arrived, and thanks to the neighbors and their camera, we had footage of a tall, bald guy entering our property after 3 p.m., who spent a while hanging around out front and then went to the back. The police were not happy to hear my part of the story. They looked at me as if they wondered how I'd managed to survive so many years. Ryan's parents were even less impressed. They spent days complaining about me and making up a story about how I should have fought and protected the house. My parents again tried to convince me to move back home, and when after 3 weeks the situation only became more irritating, I packed my bags and actually did it. After that, I had a few conversations with police, but as far as I know, the burglar was never found. Uncle Josh note here. I completely identify with this, man. I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, and I've had a lot of stupid things done to me. One of which, when I was in college, I lived in a very large house with 4 guys on one side, 4 guys on the other, 3 girls in an apartment above us, and 2 girls who lived in the front. And one of the girls in front had a crazy boyfriend who was threatening her one night, and she called the cops, and the state police showed up, not knowing which door to go to, and they came into our side of this house, this 4-bedroom apartment we lived in. And I remember being hammered after I'd worked a shift. I was a DJ in a bar, and heard something going on downstairs, and was, like, again, hammered, half asleep. I remember my girlfriend was still up in bed, and going downstairs to a state trooper standing in our kitchen, and I was convinced that it was my friend John, whose bedroom was right off the kitchen, and talking to this guy, and this guy asking me questions until he finally realized he was in the wrong place, and I kind of snapped out of it too. So, dude, you're not alone. When you're that tired, and in my case, a little more tipsy than I would normally have wished I was, easy to just kind of blow shit off. It's a creepy story. I'm happy that I got to read it, and thanks for the memory jog. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear me narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're listening to this on YouTube and you have a minute and are so inclined and you liked what you heard, give the video a thumbs up. Leave me a comment and let me know what you thought of the stories. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. And of course, follow me on social media. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a perfect time to do so. Maybe even tell a friend. If you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider purchasing some Campfire Crew and Uncle Josh merchandise. It's the hippest shit out there, guys. More designs on the way as well. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. Or the fact that I've recorded this entire thing completely naked.